The air is heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth as twilight settles over a valley ringed by distant mountains. In the stillness, you can almost hear the whispers of ancient voices, stories of a people who crossed deserts, followed visions, and built a city of stone upon water. This is the world of the Aztecs, where prophecy and perseverance shaped an empire unlike any other. Picture the glow of sunset glimmering upon a lake, its surface broken only by reeds and the beating wings of birds. What mysteries linger in the footsteps of those who searched for their promised home? And if you were there, would you notice first the sound of water lapping at the shore, or the silence of the mountains watching above? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're listening from. Now dim your screen, let the night close in, and follow me into the first footsteps of the Mexica. The night deepens. The last light fades beyond the mountains, leaving a hush across the valley. In that hush, we go back in time, far beyond the bustling city of Tenochtitlan, far before the great pyramids were raised from stone. We return to the beginning, to the people who would one day call themselves Mexica, who in the future would be remembered as the Aztecs. Their story does not begin in glory nor in triumph, but in wandering. According to their own traditions, they came from a place they called Aztlan, a land of shimmering waters and white herons. Its exact location is lost to time. Perhaps it was a real place, perhaps more a memory, a spiritual homeland. Yet the name itself gave birth to the word Aztec. Can you imagine a people carrying within their hearts not just a home they had left behind, but also a vision of one they had yet to find? The journey was long. For generations, the Mexica were wanderers, moving from place to place through deserts, valleys, and forests. Some say they carried sacred bundles wrapped in cloth, each holding relics and symbols of the gods. These were more than objects. They were promises, reminders that destiny awaited them somewhere ahead. The most powerful of these deities was Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, who whispered through priests and dreams, guiding them forward. Picture them on the move, families walking barefoot along dusty roads, elders leaning on staffs, mothers carrying children swaddled against their backs. At night, the stars wheeled above them, the same stars we see today, though to the Mexica each constellation was alive with meaning, a map of myth and guidance. They would have heard the crackling of their campfires, the steady murmur of voices, the distant calls of owls. The journey was not easy. Many times they were unwelcome in the lands they passed. Stronger, more settled people saw them as outsiders, poor wanderers who owned no fields or cities. Often they were forced to live in the roughest ground, marshes, wastelands, or rocky soil. Yet through hardship, they learned resilience. They became skilled hunters, fishers, and foragers. They wove mats from reeds, built small shelters of cane and mud, and cooked simple meals of maize, beans, and wild herbs. In their legends, they tell of trials given by the gods. Sometimes it was hunger, sometimes battles with rival tribes, sometimes omens that turned their steps in new directions. Always, Huitzilopochtli urged them onward. Not here. Not yet. Walk further. The sign will reveal itself. And so they kept walking. Can you imagine how it felt, year after year, to move without a permanent home? Children would be born along the trail and grow old still wandering. Entire generations never saw the promised place. And yet, the people endured, because they believed that somewhere a sign awaited them, an eagle perched upon a cactus, clutching a serpent. This vision would mark their destiny, but that sign was still far ahead. For now, their lives were filled with small struggles and quiet triumphs. There were rivers to cross, mountains to climb, forests to pass through. Along the way, they encountered many other peoples of Mesoamerica. The Toltecs, whose ruined cities of stone whispered of ancient greatness. The Tepanecs and Acolwa, who guarded their fertile valleys. The Mixtecs and Zapotecs, skilled in trade and crafts. Each meeting left its mark. The Mexica absorbed words, customs, and ideas, weaving them into their own growing culture. It is said that they first entered the Great Valley of Mexico in the 13th century. Imagine the sight: a vast basin ringed with mountains, its floor filled by glittering lakes. To the west rose forests, to the east dry plains. In the middle stretched the wide, shallow waters of Lake Texcoco, broken by islands and reeds. Birds skimmed across its surface. Fish darted beneath the ripples. This valley was already a land of civilizations, dotted with towns and cities, each ruled by its own lord. When the Mexica arrived, weary from their journey, they must have felt awe and also uncertainty. Here was a land abundant in water, crops, and beauty. But here too were powerful neighbors, and the Mexica, newcomers and strangers, had to find a place among them. At first, they lived as outsiders once more. Some settled on the edges of the lake, in marshy areas avoided by others. They became laborers, serving more established peoples. They fished, hunted waterfowl, and gathered reeds to weave mats and thatch roofs. Slowly, they learned the ways of the valley. They studied the farming techniques of their neighbors, the calendars of priests, the art of weaving and carving. Yet even in these humble days, their spirit was not broken. They carried within them the memory of their God's command, the promise of a greater future. Huitzilopochtli was said to demand sacrifice and strength, urging them to grow fierce, to prove themselves as warriors. And so, even while they worked as servants, they trained in combat, sharpening obsidian blades and practicing with bows and spears. Legends tell of hardships during these years. At times, the Mexica were driven out of fertile lands, forced to retreat into swamps and barren ground. They were mocked as a crude, unrefined people, yet this only hardened their resolve. They clung to the belief that destiny had chosen them for greatness, if only they could endure long enough to find their sign. Think of them by the lakeshore, a small band of wanderers, their homes little more than huts of cane, their children running barefoot in the mud. And yet, in their songs and rituals, they spoke of kings and temples, of battles yet to come, of an empire not yet born. At night, under the cold stars, their priests would gather the people and speak of visions. They would tell of the eagle that would one day appear, fierce and radiant, perched on a prickly pear cactus. The people listened, eyes closed, imagining that moment. Perhaps you can picture it now. A lone eagle spreading its wings in the morning sun, a serpent grasped in its talons, the cactus rising from stone. It was not yet real, but it lived vividly in their hearts. This belief, this promise, was their strength. It carried them through hunger, rejection, and exile. It gave them patience to wait and courage to fight. As the years passed, their numbers grew. Children became warriors, elders became storytellers. Each generation added to the living memory of the people. They were no longer just wanderers. They were becoming the Mexica, a people forged in endurance, bound together by vision, and still they searched. Their steps would take them deeper into the valley, closer to the destiny that awaited. Ahead lay trials of blood and fire, alliances and betrayals, triumphs and tragedies. Ahead lay the great city they would raise upon water, the city whose name would echo for centuries, Tenochtitlan. But on this first night, in these first whispers of the valley, they are only beginning. The lake glimmers under the moon, the reeds sway softly, and the Mexica rest by their fires, dreaming of the sign that will one day change everything. And so we pause here as the firelight flickers and the night deepens, with the people still wondering, still waiting for their promise to unfold. The fire crackles low, the night air cool upon the valley, and the Mexica dream of the sign still to come. Yet dreams alone cannot sustain a people. With dawn, they rise once more, and the long migration continues. The journey of the Mexica through the Valley of Mexico and beyond was not a single path, but a series of movements, forward, back, halted by resistance, driven on by visions. Each step was shaped by hardship and hope. For a people carrying prophecy as their compass, every stone in the road became a test, every omen a message. The world they wandered was vast and shifting. To the north stretched dry plains and high deserts, harsh lands where survival depended on skill and endurance. Winds blew dust across the horizon, and rivers ran thin beneath the sun. To the south lay greener valleys, rich with maize fields, lakes, and markets humming with trade. The Mexica walked between these worlds, neither firmly belonging to one nor the other. Picture them crossing the desert, bare feet on hot earth, their shadows long in the afternoon sun. Children grew tired and clung to their mothers. Hunters ranged far ahead in search of water or game. The wind carried the smell of sage and mesquite. At night, when the desert cooled, they gathered close, singing songs to keep their spirits steady. Yet the desert was not only a place of suffering, it was also a teacher. It taught the Mexica to endure hunger, to travel light, to read the land for signs of water, to walk with patience. These skills would later help them survive even greater trials. Along the way, they came into conflict with settled peoples who saw them as intruders. The valley was already a patchwork of city-states, each with its own ruler, warriors, and traditions. The Mexica, poor and landless, had to negotiate their place carefully. Sometimes they offered service in exchange for shelter. They became mercenaries, fighting for local rulers. They farmed land others would not till, and they gathered reeds in the marshes. Yet other times, they were rejected, driven off, forced to move once more. Their legends remember a long string of such wanderings. In some towns, they were permitted to stay a while, but only in the roughest quarters. In others, they were allowed to build temples to their god, but were still looked upon with suspicion. Again and again, they were reminded they were not yet home. Through all of this, the voice of Huitzilopochtli urged them forward. Priests carried sacred bundles, swathed in cloth, never to be opened except in ritual. These bundles were said to contain divine objects, the heart of their faith, the presence of the god himself. Wherever the Mexica camped, these bundles were set upon altars, and offerings of incense, flowers, and food were laid before them. Sometimes the god demanded more. In their early legends, there are stories of sacrifices, offerings of life itself, to strengthen the people's bond with the divine. Though told softly now, In those times, such rituals carried deep meaning. To the Mexica, sacrifice was not cruelty, but continuity, a way to keep the universe in balance. Each ritual bound them closer as a people, reminding them that their journey was more than survival. It was destiny unfolding. The Mexica also told stories to keep courage alive. Around campfires, elders recalled the greatness of ancient Toltec cities, where pyramids once gleamed with turquoise and rulers spoke with the gods. Though those cities lay in ruins by the time the Mexica wandered, their memory lived on as a model of greatness. "We too will build such cities," they whispered. "One day our temples will touch the sky." Imagine a child listening to such words on a cold night, staring up at the stars. Perhaps she dreamed of temples rising from the marshes, of warriors clad in feathered armor, of markets filled with color and song. The dream gave warmth against the chill, strength against the weariness of the road. The migration was not always steady. There were years when they remained in one place, tilling poor soil or fishing shallow waters, trying to make a life. Yet always, some omen would come. A vision in a dream, a bird's call, an unexpected storm. And the priests would say, "It is not here. We must rise again." And so, mats were rolled up, huts abandoned, bundles lifted, and once more the road stretched before them. One of the most remembered episodes in their wandering was the time they came to Chapultepec, the hill of the grasshoppers, near the lakeshore. For a while they tried to settle there, drawn by its spring water and defensible cliffs. But the Tepanecs, a powerful neighboring people, saw them as a threat. The Mexica were attacked and driven away, scattered like leaves in the wind. Some were captured, others killed, the rest forced to flee. Yet even this defeat became part of their story, a reminder that their true home had not yet been found. Still, the Mexica were resilient. Each loss only deepened their determination. With every rejection, their unity grew stronger, their belief more fierce. "The gods test us," they told themselves. "They harden us for the greatness to come." Through all this movement, the landscape itself became part of their memory. Hills, lakes, and valleys carried stories of trials and omens. A mountain was not just a mountain. It was where the people once rested, where a sign appeared, or where they were forced to flee. In this way, geography became history, and history became faith. The children of the migration grew up knowing no permanent home, yet they carried within them the certainty that one awaited. They knew hunger and cold, but also the closeness of a people bound together in struggle. They walked across deserts, but in their dreams, they already saw a city upon water, radiant beneath the sun. Can you imagine that? To live your entire life on the move, yet never despair, because you trust that your journey has purpose. Perhaps we too, in our own wanderings, carry unseen destinies ahead of us. And so, the migration continued, year after year, through hardship and hope. The Mexica crossed valleys, climbed ridges, camped by rivers. They worked as mercenaries for city-states, learning the art of organized war. They observed the marketplaces of larger towns, learning the rhythms of trade. They studied calendars, rituals, and architecture, weaving fragments of culture into their own. Unknowingly, they were gathering the tools they would need to build an empire. Their hardships taught them resilience. Their service to others taught them strategy. Their exile gave them unity. All of it was preparation for the day when the sign would appear. At last, after many generations of wandering, they came to a marshy place by the waters of Lake Texcoco. It was not fertile farmland nor high ground. It was a place others had avoided. But here, on a small island among reeds, they saw the vision that had been promised. An eagle perched upon a cactus, wings spread wide, a serpent in its beak. The people gathered in awe. Some wept, others sang. Priests raised their arms to the sky. After centuries of wandering, their sign had appeared. This was the place. This was destiny fulfilled. Here, upon this unlikely ground of water and mud, the Mexica would plant their future. Here they would raise temples, markets, and gardens. Here they would build Tenochtitlan, the city at the heart of the Aztec world. But that triumph still lay ahead. For now, the people stood in the marshes, gazing upon the eagle and the cactus, filled with reverence and relief. Their migration was over, yet their true journey, the building of an empire, had only just begun. The lake rippled around them, the reeds whispered in the breeze, and the people whispered too, in awe and gratitude. After so many deserts, after so many dreams, they had finally found home. The marsh is quiet. The reeds sway softly in the wind, their tips brushing against one another with a hushed whisper. Water laps gently at the shore. Birds wheel overhead, their calls echoing across the open sky. And there, on a small patch of stone rising out of the lake, the people see it at last. The eagle. Its wings spread wide, dark feathers catching the light of the morning sun. Beneath it grows a cactus, its spines sharp, and its flowers red against the grey stone. In the eagle's curved beak, a serpent writhes, twisting and gleaming like polished jade. The image is so vivid, so fierce, that the people cannot breathe for a moment. They are still, as though the world itself has paused. This was the sign foretold. The vision carried for centuries, the promise whispered by Huitzilopochtli. An eagle, a cactus, a serpent, destiny embodied. The priests raise their hands, voices trembling. They chant words of gratitude, praising the God who has guided them through deserts and hunger, through exile and defeat. Some fall to their knees in the mud, tears slipping down their cheeks. Others clasp their children, whispering, "Remember this day. This is the beginning." For so long, the Mexica had been wanderers. They had known only rejection and struggle. But now, in this unlikely place, a marshy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, their journey ended. Here, they would build their city. It may seem strange to us. The place was hardly welcoming. The soil was wet and heavy, more water than earth. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. The ground sank beneath their feet, sucking at sandals. It was not the fertile farmland that others had claimed, nor the high, defensible hills where noble cities stood. It was a place of reeds and mud, avoided by neighbours. Yet to the Mexica, this was perfect. To them, the very unlikeliness of the site was proof of divine will. If the gods had chosen this swampy island, then surely here they would flourish. And besides, it was land no one else desired. No rival claimed it. For the first time in generations, the Mexica could truly call a place their own. So they began. Imagine the scene. Families kneeling in the mud, weaving reeds into mats, laying them down as the first platforms of home. Men drove stakes into the soft earth, binding them together with cords of fibre. Women gathered clay from the lakebed, shaping it into bricks to reinforce walls. Children carried bundles of reeds and firewood, their laughter carrying across the water. Step by step, hut by hut, a settlement rose upon the marsh. They named it Tenochtitlan. The place of the prickly pear cactus, honoring the vision of the eagle. In time, this name would echo across the world, but in the beginning, it was a humble village of reeds and clay, no more than a promise made visible. Life was hard at first. The soil was poor, the ground unstable. Yet necessity gave birth to invention. The Mexica learned to create Chinampas, floating gardens built from layers of mud, reeds, and vegetation, anchored by stakes. These gardens expanded their farmland, turning water into fertile earth. Rows of maize, beans, squash, and chilies soon grew upon these islands, green and thriving beneath the sun. Fishing and bird hunting provided food as well. Canoes slipped silently through the reeds, carrying nets and spears. Smoke rose from cooking fires, where tortillas were pressed by hand and beans simmered in clay pots. The lake, once a barrier, became their greatest ally. Step by step, the settlement grew stronger. Wooden causeways linked the island to the mainland, so goods and people could flow in and out. Temples of wood and stone began to rise, their steps reaching skyward. At the heart of it all stood a shrine to Huitzilopochtli, the god who had guided them here. His temple was modest at first, but already it promised greatness. The neighbours of the Mexica looked upon them with wary eyes. To the powerful city-states around Lake Texcoco, such as the Tepenacs, the Acolua, and the Culua, this new settlement seemed insignificant at first. A cluster of huts upon water, built by people once considered beggars and mercenaries. Few could imagine it would grow into anything more. And yet, the Mexica carried an unshakable certainty. They were no longer wanderers. They were builders, rooted at last. Every reed they laid, every brick they moulded, every ritual they performed upon the temple steps, all was done with the conviction that they had been chosen. Daily life carried on with a rhythm that was both ordinary and sacred. Children played in the shallows, chasing frogs. Women spun cotton thread, their spindles whirring softly. Men returned from fishing with nets heavy with shimmering tilapia. Priests burned copal incense, the fragrant smoke drifting over the water, carrying prayers upward. Every task was infused with meaning, for each action contributed to the survival of the new city. At dawn, the lake glowed with golden light, turning the water into a mirror of the sky. Canoes slid across its surface like shadows. At dusk, the mountains ringed the valley in deepening purple, their slopes lit by the last rays of the sun. And above it all, the eagle still circled, a living reminder of the promise fulfilled. The Mexica wove stories of this moment into their songs. They told their children, "We came here by command of the gods. This is our land, our gift, our destiny." The eagle on the cactus became their emblem, a symbol of strength, resilience, and divine favour. It is a symbol so powerful that even today it remains at the heart of Mexico's flag, a reminder of ancient roots. But though the people rejoiced, challenges lay ahead. Survival in the valley was never easy. The land was contested, and the Mexica still had powerful neighbours. To thrive, they would need not only gardens and temples, but also alliances, warriors, and strategies. Their city was born, but it was fragile, a flower blooming upon water, vulnerable to storms and enemies alike. Yet in those early years, hope outweighed fear. Every reed hut was a victory. Every crop harvested was a promise fulfilled. The people had endured deserts and dreams, and now they stood upon their own soil. Can you imagine the feeling of those first nights in Tenochtitlan? To lie down upon a mat woven of reeds, the scent of water lilies drifting in through the open doorway, the sound of frogs singing in the marsh. To know that for the first time, you were not a wanderer, but a citizen of a home your people had built. The city would grow, it would rise higher, shine brighter, and one day astonish even the strangers who came from across the sea. But in this moment, it was only beginning, tender, fragile, glowing with the quiet fire of faith. And so the Mexica slept at last in their own city, the eagle still watching above, the cactus still rooted in stone, the serpent gleaming in the dawn. Their wandering was over, their empire was yet to come. The marsh is quiet, the reeds sway softly in the wind, their tips brushing against one another with a hushed whisper. Water laps gently at the shore. Birds wheel overhead, their calls echoing across the open sky. And there, on a small patch of stone rising out of the lake, the people see it at last. The eagle, its wings spread wide, dark feathers catching the light of the morning sun. Beneath it grows a cactus, its spines sharp, and its flowers red against the grey stone. In the eagle's curved beak, a serpent writhes, twisting and gleaming like polished jade. The image is so vivid, so fierce, that the people cannot breathe for a moment. They are still, as though the world itself has paused. This was the sign foretold, the vision carried for centuries, the promise whispered by Huitzilopochtli. An eagle, a cactus, a serpent, destiny embodied. The priests raise their hands, voices trembling. They chant words of gratitude, praising the God who has guided them through deserts and hunger, through exile and defeat. Some fall to their knees in the mud, tears slipping down their cheeks. Others clasp their children, whispering, "Remember this day. This is the beginning." For so long, the Mexica had been wanderers. They had known only rejection and struggle. But now, in this unlikely place, a marshy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, their journey ended. Here, they would build their city. It may seem strange to us. The place was hardly welcoming. The soil was wet and heavy, more water than earth. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. The ground sank beneath their feet, sucking at sandals. It was not the fertile farmland that others had claimed, nor the high, defensible hills where noble cities stood. It was a place of reeds and mud, avoided by neighbours. Yet to the Mexica, this was perfect. To them, the very unlikeliness of the site was proof of divine will. If the gods had chosen this swampy island, then surely here they would flourish. And besides, it was land no one else desired. No rival claimed it. For the first time in generations, the Mexica could truly call a place their own. So they began. Imagine the scene. Families kneeling in the mud, weaving reeds into mats, laying them down as the first platforms of home. Men drove stakes into the soft earth, binding them together with cords of fibre. Women gathered clay from the lake bed, shaping it into bricks to reinforce walls. Children carried bundles of reeds and firewood, their laughter carrying across the water. Step by step, hut by hut, a settlement rose upon the marsh. They named it Tenochtitlan, the place of the prickly pear cactus, honouring the vision of the eagle. In time, this name would echo across the world, but in the beginning, it was a humble village of reeds and clay, no more than a promise made visible. Life was hard at first. The soil was poor, the ground unstable. Yet necessity gave birth to invention. The Mexica learned to create Chinampas, floating gardens built from layers of mud, reeds, and vegetation, anchored by stakes. These gardens expanded their farmland, turning water into fertile earth. Rows of maize, beans, squash, and chilies soon grew upon these islands, green and thriving beneath the sun. Fishing and bird hunting provided food as well. Canoes slipped silently through the reeds, carrying nets and spears. Smoke rose from cooking fires, where tortillas were pressed by hand and beans simmered in clay pots. The lake, once a barrier, became their greatest ally. Step by step, the settlement grew stronger. Wooden causeways linked the island to the mainland, so goods and people could flow in and out. Temples of wood and stone began to rise, their steps reaching skyward. At the heart of it all stood a shrine to Huitzilopochtli, the god who had guided them here. His temple was modest at first, but already it promised greatness. The neighbours of the Mexica looked upon them with wary eyes. To the powerful city-states around Lake Texcoco, such as the Tepenacs, the Acolua and the Culua, this new settlement seemed insignificant at first. A cluster of huts upon water, built by people once considered beggars and mercenaries. Few could imagine it would grow into anything more. And yet, the Mexica carried an unshakable certainty. They were no longer wanderers. They were builders, rooted at last. Every reed they laid, every brick they moulded, every ritual they performed upon the temple steps, all was done with the conviction that they had been chosen. Daily life carried on with a rhythm that was both ordinary and sacred. Children played in the shallows, chasing frogs. Women spun cotton thread, their spindles whirring softly. Men returned from fishing with nets heavy with shimmering tilapia. Priests burned copal incense, the fragrant smoke drifting over the water, carrying prayers upward. Every task was infused with meaning, for each action contributed to the survival of the new city. At dawn, the lake glowed with golden light, turning the water into a mirror of the sky. Canoes slid across its surface like shadows. At dusk, the mountains ringed the valley in deepening purple, their slopes lit by the last rays of the sun. And above it all, the eagle still circled, a living reminder of the promise fulfilled. The Mexica wove stories of this moment into their songs. They told their children, "We came here by command of the gods. This is our land, our gift, our destiny." The eagle on the cactus became their emblem, a symbol of strength, resilience, and divine favour. It is a symbol so powerful that even today it remains at the heart of Mexico's flag, a reminder of ancient roots. But though the people rejoiced, challenges lay ahead. Survival in the valley was never easy. The land was contested, and the Mexica still had powerful neighbours. To thrive, they would need not only gardens and temples, but also alliances, warriors, and strategies. Their city was born, but it was fragile, a flower blooming upon water, vulnerable to storms and enemies alike. Yet in those early years, hope outweighed fear. Every reed hut was a victory. Every crop harvested was a promise fulfilled. The people had endured deserts and dreams, and now they stood upon their own soil. Can you imagine the feeling of those first nights in Tenochtitlan? To lie down upon a mat woven of reeds, the scent of water lilies drifting in through the open doorway, the sound of frogs singing in the marsh. To know that for the first time, you were not a wanderer, but a citizen of a home your people had built. The city would grow, it would rise higher, shine brighter, and one day astonish even the strangers who came from across the sea. But in this moment, it was only beginning, tender, fragile, glowing with the quiet fire of faith. And so the Mexica slept at last in their own city, the eagle still watching above, the cactus still rooted in stone, the serpent gleaming in the dawn. Their wandering was over, their empire was yet to come. Morning comes gently over Tenochtitlan. The first rays of sunlight filter through the mountains, scattering golden light across Lake Texcoco. Mist lifts from the surface of the water, drifting like soft veils. On the island, the city awakens. Smoke curls upward from hearths as women grind maize, the rasp of stone on stone echoing in countless courtyards. Canoes push away from the reed-lined banks, paddles dipping silently into still waters. Dogs bark, children laugh, and the hum of life begins anew. To step into this world is to see a city alive with rhythm, not only the rhythm of survival, but the rhythm of culture, song, and community. Tenochtitlan, though young, is already vibrant. At the heart of daily life was maize. The golden grain was more than food. It was life itself. According to legend, the gods had formed humankind from maize dough, shaping flesh from corn, blood from its juice. To eat maize was to renew one's connection to creation. In kitchens across the city, women knelt at grinding stones, turning kernels into masa. The sound was steady, hypnotic, like the heartbeat of the city. Tortillas, tamales, and atole, a warm maize drink, sustained families each day. Alongside maize grew beans and squash, forming the three sisters of Mesoamerican sustenance. Chilies added spice, tomatoes richness, and amaranth seeds a subtle nutty flavor. From the lake came fish, frogs, and waterfowl. In gardens, herbs and flowers flourished. Food was humble yet abundant, carried in baskets woven from reeds, shared around clay hearths, glowing with coals. Can you smell it? The earthy aroma of maize steaming in husks, the sharp scent of chilies roasting over flame, the sweetness of cacao whipped into froth with water. To walk through Tenochtitlan was to move through a world of fragrance, each scent a story of family and tradition. Beyond the home, the marketplace was the pulse of the city. The great tianguis at Tlatelolco, the sister city across the water, grew into one of the largest in the world. Imagine entering it on a busy morning. Thousands of people gathered in a vast open square. Stalls arranged in neat rows. Merchants displayed pottery painted with swirling designs. Cotton cloth dyed in brilliant reds and blues, and obsidian blades sharp enough to slice a hair. Farmers laid out baskets of maize, beans, chilies, and honey. Fishermen sold fresh trout, while hunters brought rabbits, deer, and quail. There were flowers, marigolds and dahlias, lilies and roses, filling the air with perfume. There were pigments and dyes, feathers of every colour, beads of jade and turquoise, golden ornaments that gleamed in the sun. And woven through it all were voices, sellers calling out their wares, buyers haggling with laughter and good-natured argument, children darting between stalls. Order guided the chaos. Officials moved through the crowd to ensure fairness. Standard measures of maize and beans were checked, disputes judged, and prices balanced. The marketplace was more than trade. It was governance, law, and society at work. To the Mexica, it was a living school where one learned not just what to eat and where, but how to be part of the greater whole. Even music filled daily life. The sound of drums echoed through temples and homes alike. The huehuetl, a tall wooden drum, beat with deep resonance, while the teponaztli, carved with hollow chambers, sang in sharper tones. Flutes of clay and reed produced melodies that drifted across the canals. Shell trumpets called out at ceremonies, their voices carrying like wind across the water. Children learned rhythm early, clapping hands and stamping feet in time to the music. Dancers stepped in circles, costumes swirling with feathers and shells, their movements imitating birds, jaguars, and serpents. These dances were not mere entertainment. They were offerings, ways of honoring the gods and binding the community together. Education, too, was central. Every child, whether noble or common, was expected to learn. Boys trained in schools called Kalmakak or Telposhkali, where they studied history, religion, and the arts of war. Girls learned weaving, cooking, and the rituals of home and temple. Both learned songs, prayers, and the meaning of the calendar. Knowledge was not a luxury, but a duty. To know the stories of the past was to honor ancestors. To know the rituals was to keep the universe in balance. Homes were simple, yet filled with warmth. Walls of adobe or stone enclosed courtyards where families gathered. Reed mats served as beds, rolled up each morning and spread out each night. Pots of clay held food and water. Baskets of woven fibre kept maize and beans. Dogs curled by the hearth, serving as companions and protectors. Turkeys strutted in courtyards, their feathers gleaming in sunlight. Canals wound between neighbourhoods, carrying canoes filled with produce, firewood, and families. Imagine gliding through one at dusk, the water reflecting torches along the shore, the scent of flowers drifting from gardens, the sound of laughter spilling from courtyards. Above, the mountains stood silhouetted against the fading sky, their slopes glowing with the last light of day. Faith infused even the simplest tasks. A woman grinding maize murmured a prayer of thanks to the goddess Chicomecoatl, Lady of Sustenance. A fisherman offered the first catch of the day back to the water, honoring the spirits within. A child was bathed in a ritual that invoked Tlaloc, god of rain, for health and strength. Life was not divided into sacred and ordinary. All was sacred, woven together in a single fabric. The calendar guided the rhythm of the year. Festivals marked the cycles of sun and moon, rain and harvest. Each month brought ceremonies, dances, and offerings, filling the city with colour and song. For a people who had once wandered without home, these celebrations gave a deep sense of belonging, anchoring them in time as firmly as the city anchored them in place. And so, daily life in Tenochtitlan was both ordinary and extraordinary. It was the grinding of maize and the beating of drums, the weaving of cloth and the chanting of prayers, the laughter of children and the solemn voice of priests. It was survival, but also joy. It was work, but also wonder. Can you imagine walking through its streets at sunset? The sky painted orange and violet, the temples glowing white against the darkening mountains, the air filled with the scent of smoke and flowers. A canoe slips past, its paddler silent. From a courtyard comes the sound of a flute, sweet and low. Somewhere, drums begin, steady and sure, calling the people to gather once more. Tenochtitlan was not yet the empire it would become, but already it was alive with spirit. Markets, music and maize bound the people together, weaving their days into a tapestry of strength and beauty. In the rhythm of daily life, the Mexica found more than sustenance. They found identity, joy, and the steady beat of a future yet to come. The day fades over Lake Texcoco. The market stalls grow quiet, their baskets emptied of maize and beans. Smoke drifts lazily from cooking fires. Children's laughter softens into drowsy yawns. And as night draws near, torches flare within the sacred precinct at the center of Tenochtitlan. Shadows leap across stone walls, and chants rise steadily into the air. This is the heart of the city, not the marketplace, not the canals, but the temples. For here, the Mexica believed, earth touched the heavens, and human life touched the divine. The greatest of these temples, towering above all others, was the Templo Maya, the Great Temple. In time, it would become a monumental double pyramid, its twin stairways rising skyward, each crowned with a shrine, one to Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war, and one to Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Sun and water, war and harvest, the balance of life itself, stood side by side upon its summit. Climbing those steep steps, one would feel the stone still warm from the day's sun, the air thinning with each rise. At the top, priests in painted robes tended fires, burned incense, and lifted offerings to the sky. The scent of copal resin filled the air, sweet, pine-like, clinging to breath and memory. To stand there was to feel the world itself shifting between the human and the divine. Around the Templo Maya spread a sacred precinct, a wide plaza encircled by walls, within which stood smaller temples, schools, and ritual spaces. Here the city gathered during festivals, thousands filling the square with song, dance, and prayer. The echo of drums and conch shells carried far across the lake, reaching even the ears of neighboring towns. Faith was not something separate from life in Tenochtitlan. It was life. Every meal, every harvest, every sunrise and rainfall was a gift of the gods, and each gift demanded gratitude. The Mexica believed they lived within a fragile universe, one kept in motion only by the careful balance of offering and renewal. Without ritual, the sun itself might fail to rise, and the rains might never come. To guide this balance, they turned to the sacred calendar. It was unlike our calendars today, for it measured not only time, but meaning. There were two great cycles. One was the Tonalpohualli, a 260-day calendar used to divine destiny. Each day combined one of 20 signs, such as jaguar, reed, flint, or flower, with a number from 1 to 13. Together, these signs formed a sacred pattern. Priests trained for years to interpret it, reading the fate of children at birth, the best times for planting, or the omens of war. To the Mexica, days were not empty markers of time. They were alive, each carrying a unique spirit, a destiny woven into the cosmos. The second was the Xiuhpohualli, a 365-day solar calendar that tracked the seasons. It was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, with 5 additional empty days at the end, days considered dangerous, when the world's order weakened and caution was required. Each month carried its own festivals, offerings, and rituals. Together, these calendars intertwined like gears in a great cosmic machine. Every 52 years, their cycles aligned, completing a sacred century. At this moment, the people celebrated the new fire ceremony, one of the most important rituals of all. Picture it, the entire valley of Mexico falling into silence. All fires across every home, every temple, every city were extinguished. Darkness spread, unsettling and absolute. Families huddled close, their hearts filled with both fear and hope. Would the sun rise again? Would the world continue? High upon a sacred hill, priests watched the heavens. They waited for the stars to align at midnight. If the omen was favorable, a prisoner was sacrificed upon a stone altar, and from his chest, fire was drawn. A flame was kindled, blazing bright against the darkness. From this fire, runners carried torches to every corner of the city, relighting hearths, temples, and streets. The world was renewed for another 52 years. Imagine the relief, the rejoicing, as flames flickered once more in every home. Proof that life would go on. Rituals large and small guided every season. In spring, offerings were made to Tlaloc, god of rain, to bless the planting of maize. Children's tears were said to please him, their innocence ensuring abundant rains. In summer, ceremonies honoured Sip Totec, the god of renewal, symbolising life emerging from death as crops ripened in the fields. In autumn, festivals celebrated the maize harvest with dances, feasting, and offerings of food. And in winter, rituals to Huitzilopochtli reminded the people that the sun's victory over darkness depended on their devotion. Each god had a place within the Mexica's intricate pantheon. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, symbolized wisdom and wind, a bringer of knowledge. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, embodied night, fate, and the hidden trials of existence. Xochiquetzal represented love and flowers, Tlazolteotl, cleansing and forgiveness, and many others filled the cycle of divine roles. Life itself was mirrored in the gods, for every joy and hardship had its spirit, every moment its divine reflection. Festivals transformed the city into a vision of colour and sound. Streets were swept clean, altars decorated with garlands of flowers, dancers painted with vivid patterns. Drums and flutes played endlessly, their rhythms echoing across the lake. Children watched wide-eyed as processions passed, priests in elaborate costumes, their headdresses adorned with shimmering feathers of quetzal and macaw. The air filled with incense, music, and song, a sensory tapestry that bound the people together in awe. Can you imagine walking through Tenochtitlan during such a festival? The white stone temples gleaming in the sun, banners fluttering in the breeze, drums beating like the pulse of the earth. Around you, thousands move in rhythm, their steps guided by tradition, their voices rising in unison. You feel yourself part of something vast, something eternal. Yet faith was not only public spectacle. It lived within the home. Families offered maize dough shaped into small figures, shared prayers before meals, and kept household altars. Children learned early that every action, however small, carried spiritual weight. A dropped tortilla was not simply wasted food, but an offense to Chicomecoatl, the goddess of sustenance. Even sweeping the floor could be a ritual act, clearing away spiritual as well as physical dust. For the Mexica, the sacred and the ordinary were never separate. Life was lived in the shadow of the temple and the presence of the gods. To plant, to cook, to fight, to weave, all were prayers in motion. And so the city thrived not only in stone and water, but in faith and ritual. Temples of sun and shadow anchored its people, and the sacred calendar gave rhythm to their days. Through ritual, they believed they sustained not just their city, but the very cosmos itself. As night falls again over Tenochtitlan, torches flicker in the temple plaza. Drums echo into the darkness, their beats steady, eternal. The people lie down to sleep upon their reed mats, comforted by the certainty that their prayers and offerings have kept the universe in balance for another day. And above them, the stars wheel in silent procession, their patterns marking the cycles of fate, guiding both gods and men through the endless flow of time. The morning sun rises over Tenochtitlan, gilding the waters of the lake in soft gold. From the causeways, warriors march, their footsteps steady, obsidian blades glinting in the light. Feathers shimmer upon their headdresses, jaguar skins ripple across muscled shoulders, and eagle feathers fan out like wings in the dawn. For the Mexica, war was not chaos or cruelty. It was sacred duty, an extension of the rhythm that kept the cosmos alive. The Mexica had always been hardened by struggle. In their long years of wandering, they had fought for survival against rivals who mocked them as outsiders. Even after founding Tenochtitlan, their neighbors treated them as upstarts, their city perched precariously upon the water. To endure, they became warriors, fierce, disciplined, unyielding. Their weapons were unlike the steel blades of later centuries. Instead, they carried the macuahuitl, a wooden club edged with sharp obsidian shards, gleaming black as night. Though fragile compared to metal, obsidian could cut with surgical precision, sharper than any steel. In the hands of a skilled warrior, the macuahuitl could sever a limb in a single stroke. They wielded spears tipped with obsidian, bows strung with fibre, and atlatls, spear throwers that launched darts with deadly force. Shields of woven reeds and wood, often decorated with bright patterns, protected them in battle. But more important than weapons was courage, discipline, and the knowledge that each strike was not only for conquest, but for the balance of the world. War was deeply tied to faith. The Mexica believed that the sun itself needed nourishment in the form of sacrifice. To capture an enemy alive, to present him upon the temple steps, was to feed the sun and ensure its rising. Thus, victory was measured not only by territory gained, but by captives taken. This belief gave rise to the Flower Wars, ritual battles fought between neighboring states, not to conquer land, but to capture prisoners for sacrifice. The name may sound gentle, but the wars were fierce. They were called flowers because warriors compared themselves to blossoms, blooming brightly in courage before withering in death. To die in such a battle was to offer oneself as a flower to the gods. Can you imagine standing upon the battlefield? The air thick with the sound of drums, calling warriors forward. Bright banners wave, feathers shimmer, obsidian blades flash in the sun. The ground trembles beneath the charge. Yet unlike wars of annihilation, these battles were controlled, guided by ritual. The aim was not to slaughter, but to seize. A warrior who captured enemies alive earned more honor than one who slew many. Honor was everything. From a young age, boys trained in the Telpochcali schools, where discipline was strict and lessons harsh. They carried heavy loads, slept little, and endured hunger to harden their bodies. They learned to march in step, to wield weapons, to sing the songs of war. They were told again and again, bravery was the path to glory, cowardice the deepest shame. Those who excelled rose through ranks marked by animal symbols. A youth who captured his first enemy became a full warrior, allowed to wear the cape of valor. With more captives, he could join the orders of the eagle warriors or jaguar warriors. Eagles embodied the rising sun, jaguars the power of night. Dressed in feathered helmets or spotted pelts, these warriors became living symbols of divine strength. In battle, their cries echoed across fields, fierce and rhythmic, calling upon gods and ancestors. They carried standards decorated with bright banners, their movements a living tide of colour and sound. Each warrior sought not only victory, but eternal honour. For those who died in war were promised a place in the house of the sun, where they would rise each morning alongside its fiery path. The city itself pulsed with this warrior spirit. Families celebrated sons who returned with captives, their deeds recorded in painted codices. Songs told of bravery, dances reenacted victories. Even in the marketplace, one could see the influence of war. Shields, spears, and armor sold alongside maize and flowers. Yet war was not only ritual. As Tenochtitlan grew, so did its ambition. The Mexica sought tribute, wealth, and power. They allied with some city-states, fought against others, and slowly carved their place among the rulers of the valley. War became both sacred duty and political necessity. Each victory brought new lands, new goods, new captives for the temples. Each defeat reminded them that their city, though rising, was not yet unassailable. For the common people, war was both pride and burden. Husbands, fathers, and sons marched to distant fields, sometimes never returning. Women waited at home, weaving cloth for their armor, sending them off with prayers. Children watched processions of warriors leaving along the causeways, their banners snapping in the wind, their songs fierce and solemn. And yet, war also bound the people together. It gave them purpose, a sense of being chosen. To the Mexica, every battle was part of the cosmic cycle. The sun required nourishment, and they, as the chosen people of Huitzilopochtli, were entrusted to provide it. Their city existed because of faith, and faith demanded the courage of warriors. Can you imagine lying down at night in Tenochtitlan, hearing drums echo faintly across the lake? Not the drums of dance or market, but the drums of war, summoning men to march. Perhaps fear stirred in the heart, but also pride. For in those drums beat the destiny of the city itself. The flower wars continued for generations, shaping both the culture and the reputation of the Mexica. Their neighbors both feared and respected them, knowing that their blades sought not destruction, but captives destined for the temples. Yet beyond the rituals, real power grew. With each campaign, the Mexica tested their strength, honed their strategy, and prepared for the greater conquests to come. Step by step, obsidian blade by obsidian blade, the Mexica transformed themselves from wanderers into conquerors. Their city upon the water was no longer just a fragile village. It was becoming the heart of an empire. The sun sinks now beyond the mountains, the lake glowing red with its last light. Warriors return across the causeways, their banners trailing, their voices carrying songs of valor. The people gather to greet them, to hear of victories, to share pride in their strength. And above them all, the temple towers stand silent, waiting. For tomorrow, or the next day, or the next festival, the drums will call again, and the blades of obsidian will shine once more beneath the sun. The sun rises once more over Lake Texcoco, painting the waters with hues of rose and amber. Canoes slip quietly along the canals of Tenochtitlan, their paddlers steady and sure. Yet these are no ordinary mornings of fishing or farming. Some of these canoes bear goods from far-off lands, cacao beans from the warm coasts, turquoise stones from the north, and the long, iridescent feathers of the quetzal bird, shimmering green like captured light. If war brought honor and captives, it was trade and tribute that filled the city with wealth, beauty, and splendor. For Tenochtitlan was not only a city of warriors, it was a city of merchants, artisans, and tribute collectors. And through them, the empire grew rich, powerful, and dazzling to behold. Trade was the lifeblood that connected distant lands to the valley. The Mexica themselves travelled as merchants, their guilds highly respected. These traders, called Posteca, were more than simple sellers of goods. They were explorers, diplomats, and spies. Moving in caravans, they journeyed along roads that wound through forests, mountains, and deserts, carrying woven cloth, obsidian blades, and trinkets to exchange for exotic treasures. Picture them setting out at dawn, men burdened with great packs on their backs, walking in long lines along dusty trails. Some carried cacao beans, counted not as food but as money, for in the empire these beans served as currency. A cloak of fine cotton might cost dozens of beans, while a ripe tomato might cost only one. Turkeys, sandals, or knives each had their price in this small, precious coin. The Posteca travelled south to the steamy lowlands, where they obtained bright feathers of quetzal, macaw, and hummingbird, each more vivid than the last. They bartered for cacao, vanilla, and jaguar pelts. From the north, they brought turquoise, obsidian, and copper. From the coast came seashells, salt, and fish. Each journey expanded the wealth of Tenochtitlan, and each return filled its markets with wonders. But merchants were not only traders. They carried messages between cities, observed foreign armies, and reported back to the rulers. In this way, they were also the eyes and ears of the empire. To be a Posteca was to walk in two worlds, one of commerce and one of quiet diplomacy. Back in Tenochtitlan, the goods they carried transformed the city into a place of colour and abundance. The markets brimmed with treasures. Imagine walking through Tlatelolco's great tianguis, rows upon rows of stalls, each glowing with wealth from distant lands. Cloaks of brilliant cotton, dyed with cochineal red and indigo blue, hung neatly beside stacks of obsidian knives polished to a mirror shine. Feathers shimmered in the sun, arranged in headdresses and fans that seemed to glow with their own light. There were gourds of honey and chili paste, gourds of foamy cacao drink mixed with water and spices. There were baskets of fruit, guavas, papayas, prickly pears and tunas, their sweet scent filling the air. There were piles of salt, jars of pulque, slabs of rubber, bundles of firewood. And everywhere, the sound of voices, traders calling out, buyers bargaining, children laughing as they darted between stalls. Yet not all wealth came through trade. Much of it came through tribute. As the Mexica began to expand their influence, they demanded payment from conquered peoples. This tribute was the lifeblood of empire, flowing into Tenochtitlan in endless streams of goods. Each subject city was required to deliver specific items: maize, beans, cotton, jade, feathers, gold, cacao, in precise quantities and at regular intervals. Imagine the sight of tribute arriving, long lines of porters, each carrying bundles on their backs, their footsteps measured and weary. Baskets of maize stacked high, bolts of cotton carried on shoulders, cages of exotic birds fluttering with bright feathers. Gold gleamed in the sun, turquoise sparkled like water, and jaguar skins rippled with spotted patterns. All this was brought to the capital, filling storerooms, adorning temples, clothing nobles, and feeding armies. Tribute was not only wealth, it was a symbol of power. Each bundle of maize was proof of loyalty. Each feather was a reminder of submission. The empire thrived not simply on conquest, but on the steady, organized flow of goods from every corner of its domain. Within Tenochtitlan, artisans transformed these riches into beauty. Feather workers, called amanteca, created dazzling mosaics and headdresses from thousands of tiny feathers, each placed with care until the image of a bird, a god, or a sunburst came alive in shimmering colours. Jewelers shaped jade, turquoise, and obsidian into ornaments that gleamed like fire and water. Goldsmiths hammered thin sheets of metal into delicate shapes that caught the light of the sun. Potters painted bowls with intricate designs of serpents, flowers, and clouds. To walk through the workshops of Tenochtitlan was to see transformation. Raw goods turned into art, tribute made into treasure. This wealth supported not only the nobility, but also the elaborate rituals of the temples. Priests wore cloaks embroidered with jewels, headdresses glittering with feathers, sandals studded with jade. Offerings at shrines included flowers, incense, and golden ornaments. Festivals were adorned with banners of cotton dyed in brilliant colours, gifts made possible by tribute gathered from across the empire. Yet wealth was not evenly shared. Nobles wore cloaks of cotton, their homes decorated with fine goods, while common people still wore garments of simple maguey fibre. Tribute placed heavy burdens on subject peoples, who sometimes resented the endless demands. Though the empire glittered with abundance, it was built upon the labour of many who toiled in distant fields and workshops. Still, the system held strong, for it bound together diverse lands and peoples under the power of Tenochtitlan. From high mountains to coastal plains, from deserts to rainforests, goods flowed like rivers toward the city in the lake. Each basket, each feather, each cacao bean added to the brilliance of the empire. Can you imagine standing upon one of the city's causeways, watching a tribute caravan arrive? The long line of porters, the colours of feathers catching sunlight, the clinking of jade beads, the scent of cacao carried on the wind. To the citizens of Tenochtitlan, it was proof that their city was the centre of the world, chosen by the gods, nourished by the wealth of nations. At night, the riches of the day gave way to music and feasting. Nobles reclined on mats woven of reeds and cotton, drinking chocolate froth spiced with chili and vanilla. Musicians played drums and flutes. Dancers moved in shimmering costumes. Feathers caught the torchlight, glowing like emerald fire. Stories of trade journeys and tribute deliveries were told, weaving pride into the heart of the people. And so, alongside war and faith, trade and tribute sustained the empire. The Mexica were not only warriors and worshippers, they were also merchants and administrators, organizers of a vast system that stretched far beyond the Valley of Mexico. The city of Tenochtitlan grew rich, its temples adorned, its people fed, its rulers clothed in brilliance. From mud and marsh had risen a city of dazzling colour, sustained not only by the obsidian blade, but by the feather, the jewel, and the golden coin of cacao. As the lake glimmers once more under moonlight, the storerooms of Tenochtitlan are filled, the markets fall silent, and the people sleep beneath reed mats, dreaming of distant lands whose goods flow endlessly into their city. Above, the stars wheel on, silent witnesses to an empire weaving its web of wealth across mountains, deserts, and seas. The sun rises pale and gentle over Lake Texcoco. Mist drifts like a veil above the water, parting slowly as the morning grows warm. And there, stretching in orderly rows across the shallows, lie the gardens of Tenochtitlan. Not gardens of earth alone, but gardens born from both human hands and the gift of water itself. These were the Chinampas, the floating fields. To see them was to see a miracle of survival turned into beauty. For when the Mexica first settled upon their marshy island, they faced a problem. The land was too small, too muddy, too weak to feed a growing people. But necessity shaped genius. Instead of despairing, they wove the marsh into farmland, transforming the lake into a checkerboard of green and life. Imagine the process. Men drove stakes deep into the lake bed, outlining long rectangles, narrow islands framed within the shallow waters. Into these frames, they layered reeds, mud, and rotting vegetation, piling them until the surface rose above the water. Willow trees were planted along the edges, their roots anchoring the soil, their branches shading the canals. Slowly, an island took shape. Upon it, the Mexica planted maize. Tall stalks rose golden beneath the sun, their tassels swaying gently in the breeze. Between the maize grew beans, climbing upward to entwine the stalks, fixing nutrients into the soil. At the base sprawled squash vines, their broad leaves sheltering the ground, keeping it moist and cool. Together, maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters, thrived in harmony, feeding families with their bounty. But the Chinampas held more than these staples. Rows of chilies glowed red, their sharp scent carried on the air. Amaranth sprouted in clusters, its tiny seeds ground into flour or popped like maize. Tomatoes ripened in the sun, their skins warm to the touch, their flavour rich and sweet. Flowers too were planted, marigolds, dahlias and roses, for the gods delighted in blossoms, and the city itself was often called a place where flowers bloom. From a canoe gliding through the canals, one would see a mosaic of colours: green maize, red chilies, yellow marigolds, purple blossoms. The air was alive with birdsong, the hum of insects, the gentle ripple of water against the canoe's sides. Farmers bent low, tending rows, their hands dark with earth. Children splashed along the edges, gathering reeds and lilies. Dogs barked from shaded corners, while willows bent over the water, their leaves brushing the surface. The Chinampas were not just farmland. They were works of art. Each was carefully planned, maintained with care, passed down through families. Generations tended the same plots, each season layering fresh mud dredged from the lake bottom to keep the soil fertile. This cycle of renewal ensured that the fields never lost their richness. In fact, the Chinampas became so productive that they could yield multiple harvests a year. Because of this abundance, Tenochtitlan flourished. Even as its population swelled into the tens and then hundreds of thousands, the city was fed. Maize and beans filled markets, chilies flavoured every meal, flowers adorned every festival. The Chinampas were the hidden strength of the empire, feeding not only bellies but also spirits. Can you imagine walking along one of these narrow islands at dawn? The earth cool beneath your feet, the water on either side still and reflective, the scent of moist soil rising with the mist. Ahead, rows of maize shimmer in the morning light, their stalks whispering in the breeze. Birds skim the water, their wings flashing silver. It feels like walking through a dream, a place where land and water, human effort and natural gift exist in perfect balance. The farmers of the Chinampas lived lives of rhythm and patience. At first light, they set out in canoes, paddling across the canals. Their tools were simple: wooden digging sticks, baskets woven from reeds, blades of obsidian for cutting. With these, they planted seeds, weeded rows, gathered mud, and harvested crops. Each season had its tasks: planting after the rains, harvesting under the dry sun, dredging mud when the waters were low. Yet farming was not only labour, it was also devotion. Before planting, offerings were made to Tlaloc, the rain god, and to Chicomecoatl, goddess of maize. Small bundles of flowers, food, or incense were laid upon the earth. Words of thanks were whispered. To farm was not merely to produce, it was to honor the cycle of life, to participate in the divine balance that kept the world alive. Children learned from their parents, carrying small baskets, helping to weed, learning which plants thrived in which soil. Laughter echoed across the fields as they splashed in the canals, or wove flowers into garlands. Elders, too, had their place, teaching, advising, remembering the traditions that kept the Chinampas thriving. The canals themselves were highways of life. Canoes glided silently along them, loaded with baskets of maize, flowers, or firewood. Merchants passed, carrying goods to the market. Families visited one another, drifting across the water under the shade of willows. To live in Tenochtitlan was to live with water as both barrier and bridge, as challenge and gift. The abundance of the Chinampas also allowed for beauty. Flowers grown here were not only for offerings, but also for pleasure. Garlands decorated homes, festivals, and even the hair of dancers. Gardens of noble homes overflowed with blossoms brought from the Chinampas, their colours bright against whitewashed walls. The city became a place of fragrance, its markets alive with blooms. It is said that when visitors from distant lands came to Tenochtitlan, they marvelled not only at its temples and palaces, but also at its gardens. The city seemed to float upon water, surrounded by a sea of green fields and colourful flowers. From afar, it was a jewel of lake and earth, a vision unlike any other city in the world. The gifts of the Chinampas reached beyond food and beauty. They gave the Mexica resilience. Even in times of drought or hardship, the fields produced. The careful management of water and soil ensured stability, anchoring the city in abundance while others struggled. This strength allowed Tenochtitlan to grow, to feed armies, to host festivals, to support a population that would one day rival the greatest cities on earth. And yet, the farmers remained humble. Each day they bent to the soil, paddled the canals, tended the plants. Their hands were rough, their backs bent, their lives steady. They may not have worn the feathers of warriors or the jewels of nobles, but they sustained all. Without their labour, no temple would stand, no festival would sing, no empire would rise. Can you picture them at sunset? A man kneels in the earth, pulling weeds from between rows of beans. His wife gathers chilies, her basket glowing red in the fading light. Their children laugh as they chase dragonflies along the canal. The sky burns orange and violet. The mountains stand dark against the horizon, and the lake glimmers softly. In that moment, life is simple, whole, complete. The Chinampas were more than gardens. They were the heart of Tenochtitlan, the quiet miracle that allowed a city to flourish upon water. They were the gift of the earth, shaped by human hands, blessed by the gods, renewed by the rhythm of seasons. And as the night falls, the fields rest beneath the stars. The water reflects the moon, the willows whisper, and the city sleeps, nourished by the endless generosity of its floating gardens. The city of Tenochtitlan had risen from water and mud, its gardens blooming upon the lake, its markets humming with trade, its temples gleaming white in the sun. But beauty alone did not make an empire. For in the Valley of Mexico, power was contested, and every city-state strove to be heard, to be feared, to be remembered. The Mexica, once wanderers, now faced the trials of rulership. of allies and enemies, of tribute and rebellion, of shaping not only a city, but a dominion. The Mexica's rulers, the Tlatoc, carried titles heavy with responsibility. Tlatoani meant the speaker, one whose words bound the people, one who gave voice to the will of gods and ancestors. Their power rested not only in the strength of warriors, but also in the wisdom of diplomacy. To lead Tenochtitlan was to walk a narrow path between friend and foe, between gift and demand, between reverence and fear. In the early years, the Mexica remained under the shadow of stronger neighbors, especially the Tepanecs, who ruled from Azcapotzalco. For a time, the Mexica served as their allies, paying tribute and fighting in their wars. Tribute meant maize, cloth, and labor, heavy burdens for a young city. Yet service also brought strength. Through battle, the Mexica gained experience. Through tribute, they learned the mechanisms of empire. They watched, they studied, they prepared. But loyalty has limits. In time, the Tepanec overlordship grew harsh, their demands too great. Tenochtitlan's rulers, proud and ambitious, began to chafe under the weight. When the Tepanec king Maxtla sought to crush them completely, the Mexica turned from vassals into rebels. It was a moment of peril, but also of transformation. Here arose the alliance that would shape the destiny of the valley. The triple alliance of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. Together they defied Azcapotzalco. The war was fierce, Obsidian clashing against Obsidian, cities burning in the night. At last, the Tepanec power was broken, their capital defeated, their dominance ended. Out of the ashes rose a new order, and at its heart, Tenochtitlan. From that victory onward, the Mexica no longer bowed to others. They became rulers in their own right, their city now partner to Texcoco and Tlacopan, though in time the Mexica's star would outshine them both. Tribute began to flow into Tenochtitlan, not as burden, but as prize. Baskets of maize, bolts of cotton, shimmering feathers, gleaming jade, precious cacao. Wealth filled storerooms, banners filled plazas, and warriors marched home in triumph. Yet empire was not built only on victory, it was also built on governance. Tribute was organized carefully, codices painted with symbols of goods, owed, and days due. Messengers carried lists to subject cities. Judges ensured tribute was collected fairly, or when it was not, ensured punishment followed swiftly. The empire became a web, each thread binding towns and peoples to the lake city. But webs can fray. Not all accepted Mexica rule willingly. Across the valley and beyond, rebellions flared. Some cities resisted tribute, refusing to bow. Others plotted in secret, whispering of freedom. Each rebellion was met with force. Warriors marched, banners unfurled, drums thundered. Towns that resisted were punished, their leaders executed, their people enslaved. To rebel against Tenochtitlan was to risk annihilation. Still, rebellion returned again and again, for tribute was heavy and resentment deep. And so, the Mexica ruled not only through wealth, but through fear. Their empire was both admired and despised, both envied and hated. Can you imagine the scene of a tribute negotiation? Envoys from a conquered city kneel in a palace courtyard, baskets of maize and cotton at their feet. Mexica officials, stern and adorned in feathers, record each item on painted codices. Warriors stand nearby, their obsidian blades resting casually but ominously. The envoys bow low, their voices soft, their eyes wary. In that moment, power is not only in the goods exchanged, but in the silence that follows. The unspoken reminder of what defiance would bring. Yet for all its harshness, the empire also brought order. Roads were maintained, markets flourished, trade expanded, festivals grew in splendor. Wealth allowed for grand temples, for lavish ceremonies, for the support of priests, artisans, and scholars. The Mexica believed themselves chosen, and their empire seemed proof of divine favor. Within the palace, rulers held council with priests and nobles. Decisions were debated beneath torchlight, voices low, faces painted with solemnity. Should tribute be increased? Should war be waged? Should mercy be shown? Each decision shaped lives across valleys and mountains. The Tlatoani's word rippled outward like a stone cast into a lake, its waves touching thousands. And yet, leadership also carried loneliness, for to rule was to bear both reverence and resentment. Nobles bowed, warriors praised, priests chanted. But in the quiet hours, rulers must have wondered if the gods themselves demanded too much, if the empire's brilliance was also its burden. The people of Tenochtitlan, meanwhile, felt pride in their rising power. Festivals celebrated victories, markets overflowed with tribute goods, songs told of conquests. Warriors returned in procession, captives in tow, their banners high. The city glowed with triumph, and the people whispered, "We are no longer wanderers. We are the heart of the world." But even in triumph, shadows lingered. Each conquest sowed seeds of resentment. Each tribute demanded kindled, quiet fury. The empire was magnificent, but it was fragile, its brilliance balanced on tension. Can you imagine walking through the city at dusk during this time? The palace glows with torchlight. Nobles whisper in halls. Warriors boast in courtyards. Priests pray on temple steps. Yet in the distance, smoke rises from rebellious towns, and envoys hurry with news of unrest. The air is thick with pride and with unease. For the Mexica were no longer only survivors, no longer only builders. They were rulers, and rulers must always guard their thrones. And so, Tenochtitlan entered a new age, no longer the city of prophecy alone, but the city of empire, radiant, powerful, admired, and feared. Its rulers had shaped it with courage, its rebels had tested it with fire, and through both, it had become the center of Mesoamerica. The waters of the lake reflected temples and causeways, banners and markets, pride and fear alike. Beneath the stars, the city dreamed not of survival, but of destiny fulfilled. An empire forged by rulers and rebels, standing tall upon the waters of its lake, awaiting both glory and challenge yet to come. The city is alive with mourning. From the eastern causeway, tribute caravans arrive in steady lines, porters bent beneath loads of cotton, cacao, and gleaming feathers. From the markets, the hum of voices carries across the water. Canoes glide through canals heavy with baskets of maize, flowers, and fish. And at the heart of it all, rising above whitewashed homes and flower gardens, stands the royal palace of Moctezuma II, Emperor of the Mexica. It is here, within its wide courtyards and painted halls, that the splendor of the Aztec world reached its height. Moctezuma, known as Huey Tlatoani, the Great Speaker, was no ordinary ruler. He was seen as the living embodiment of divine will, chosen not merely to govern, but to sustain the balance of the cosmos itself. Every step he took, every word he spoke, was imbued with sacred weight. To serve him was to serve the gods. To disobey him was to defy the order of the universe. The palace itself seemed to embody this grandeur. Imagine entering through its wide gates. Stone walls painted with vivid murals of battles and gods, courtyards shaded by trees heavy with blossoms, pools of clear water where fish darted like flashes of silver. Servants hurried along colonnaded halls carrying trays of food and drink. Gardens bloomed with exotic flowers, their fragrance drifting on the breeze. In its aviaries, birds of every hue fluttered and called. Scarlet macaws, emerald quetzals, tiny hummingbirds that glittered like gems in sunlight. In its menageries prowled jaguars and pumas, their golden eyes watching silently from behind woven screens. Deer, foxes and serpents were kept in shaded enclosures. To visitors, the palace seemed not only a seat of power, but a world unto itself, filled with all the wonders of the earth. The emperor's court was a place of strict ceremony. When Moctezuma appeared, nobles bowed low, eyes averted, for few dared look upon his face directly. He wore garments woven of the finest cotton, dyed in brilliant hues, and adorned with jewels and feathers that shimmered in the sun. His sandals were studded with jade, his cloak edged with shimmering turquoise. Each day he dressed in new garments, never to wear the same twice, for his station demanded abundance. Meals in the palace were feasts fit for a god. Servants carried in dishes from steaming kitchens, tamales stuffed with beans and chilies, roasted turkey, stews rich with herbs, maize porridge sweetened with honey. Cacao was prepared in golden cups, frothed with whisks of carved wood, spiced with vanilla, chili, or flowers. It is said that Moctezuma drank dozens of cups of cacao each day, believing it gave him vigor and strength. The emperor did not eat alone. His court gathered with him, nobles, warriors, priests, and counselors, each seated according to rank. Music played softly from flutes and drums. Dancers sometimes moved in slow rhythm, their steps precise and graceful. Conversation flowed, but always with care. Words in Moctezuma's presence were chosen like precious stones, each polished, each placed with deliberation. Justice, too, was dispensed within these walls. Moctezuma's court included judges who heard disputes, scribes who recorded tribute and decrees, and officials who organized the affairs of empire. Painted codices documented tribute owed by subject cities, alliances made, wars fought. Messengers arrived daily with news from distant provinces, reporting crops, trade, and unrest. The empire pulsed like a vast body, and Moctezuma was its heart. And what an empire it was! By his reign, Tenochtitlan's influence stretched across much of central Mexico, from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific. Tribute poured in, cacao from the warm south, cotton from the valleys, jade and turquoise from distant mountains, feathers from rainforests, gold from rivers. Tens of thousands of warriors marched under the eagle and the serpent, enforcing loyalty and demanding offerings. Subject peoples might resent their burdens, but the flow of wealth never ceased. Yet grandeur was more than wealth, it was also ritual. Each day in the sacred precinct, priests performed ceremonies to nourish the gods, and Moctezuma himself played a vital role. He was seen as mediator between earth and sky, the one whose devotion ensured the sun's rising. When he fasted, the people fasted. When he offered flowers, incense, or blood, the people felt their own place secured within the cosmos. Festivals in his time were spectacles beyond imagining. Imagine the Templo Mayor, adorned with garlands of marigolds, its steps washed in fragrant water, its shrines glowing with torchlight. Thousands gathered in the plaza, their faces painted, their cloaks bright. Drums thundered, Flutes trilled, conch shells sounded. Dancers moved in spirals, their feathered costumes shimmering like living rainbows. Priests chanted prayers that rolled like waves across the crowd. Moctezuma himself would appear, solemn, majestic, carrying offerings to the gods. His presence drew silence, awe, reverence. In those moments, the people felt the weight of destiny, the certainty that their empire stood at the very center of creation, sustained by faith, tribute, and power. And yet, beneath this splendor, tension stirred. Tribute that enriched Tenochtitlan burdened others. Some cities quietly dreamed of freedom, even as they sent baskets of maize and bolts of cotton. War was constant, for expansion was necessary to maintain the flow of captives and goods. Moctezuma's empire glittered brightly, but like all flames, it required fuel. Still, in these years, the greatness of the Mexica was undeniable. Visitors marveled at the city's beauty, its vast markets, its temples gleaming in the sun. Tenochtitlan's population swelled to hundreds of thousands, rivaling the greatest cities of the world. Canals crisscrossed its neighborhoods, causeways linked it to the mainland, aqueducts brought fresh water from distant springs. From above, it seemed a jewel floating upon water, a vision of order, abundance, and harmony. Can you imagine walking into Moctezuma's court as a visitor, to see the emperor seated upon a throne of woven reeds and gold, his cloak gleaming with turquoise, his headdress crowned with quetzal feathers that shimmered green and blue? To hear musicians playing softly, to smell the incense drifting in the air, to taste chocolate spiced with flowers and chili, you would feel small, humbled, awed by the weight of ceremony. At night, the palace grew quiet, though guards still paced its walls and torches glowed softly in the courtyards. Moctezuma withdrew to his chambers, where he consulted priests, read omens, and prepared for the day to come. Beyond the palace, the city itself lay glowing in torchlight, its canals reflecting fire like rivers of stars. The people slept upon their mats, lulled by the certainty of living at the very heart of the world. For under Moctezuma's reign, the Mexica believed their empire stood at its peak. They had transformed marsh and mud into a city of splendor, their faith into ceremony, their struggles into triumph. And though shadows of unrest flickered at the edges, few could imagine that this brilliance, this magnificence, this court of Moctezuma could ever fall. The Valley of Mexico lies quiet in the spring air. Chinampas are green with maize and squash. The markets hum with trade, and the temples echo with drums and prayer. Life in Tenochtitlan flows with the certainty of the calendar, the rising of the sun, the rhythm of the seasons. Yet far to the east, beyond mountains and forests, beyond even the coasts of the Gulf, sails catch the wind, white wings of a kind never seen upon these shores. It was the year 1519 when the first true rumours reached the valley. Fishermen and traders spoke of floating mountains upon the sea, carrying pale-skinned men clad in metal, their bodies covered in strange garments, their beards thick, their weapons flashing fire and thunder. With them came beasts larger than deer, hooves striking the earth like drums. The people of the coast had never seen such creatures, and word of them spread quickly inland. For the Mexica, whose world was rich with omens, these reports were not simply curiosities. They stirred unease, for the sacred calendar spoke of cycles, of the return of gods, of ages rising and falling. And some whispered of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, who had once departed to the east with a promise to return. Could these strangers be his messengers? Or even the god himself, come again to reclaim his place? Moctezuma listened to these rumors with a heavy heart. He was a man of deep ritual, cautious and pious. He sought guidance in the stars, in the sacred bundles, in the words of priests. Night after night, omens troubled his sleep. Comets burned across the sky. Flames leapt from the temple of Huitzilopochtli. The waters of the lake boiled and rose. All were read as warnings, signs that a great change was at hand. Meanwhile, upon the coast, the strangers moved inland. Their leader was Hernán Cortés, a man of restless ambition. He and his companions marched with a small band of Spanish soldiers and a growing army of indigenous allies, peoples weary of Mexica tribute and eager to break free of Tenochtitlan's power. Step by step, they advanced westward toward the heart of the empire. As they traveled, the Spaniards marveled at the land. They saw towns of stone, markets filled with goods, fields of maize stretching to the horizon. They walked roads straight and broad, shaded by trees, and they entered Tlaxcala, one of the Mexica's fiercest rivals, where they forged an alliance. With Tlaxcalan warriors by their side, their numbers swelled, their path strengthened. In the valley, news of their progress spread swiftly. Messengers hurried along causeways, across mountains, through forests. Each report reached Moctezuma, each more unsettling than the last. He sent gifts in hope of appeasement, golden ornaments, feathered cloaks, cacao, food, and flowers. But the strangers wanted more. Gold glittered in their eyes, and they pressed ever forward. At last, they reached the shores of Lake Texcoco, and from the causeways of Tenochtitlan, the Mexica looked upon them with awe and unease. Imagine the sight: armored men on horseback, their banners snapping in the wind, their cannons booming like thunder. Behind them marched thousands of native allies, their cries echoing across the lake. Moctezuma hesitated. Should he resist? Should he welcome them? His priests warned of danger, yet omens weighed heavily upon his heart. Perhaps these strangers truly were linked to the gods. Perhaps they were the fulfillment of prophecy. To resist them outright might be to defy destiny itself. And so, with solemn ceremony, he chose to welcome them. The Spaniards were led along the causeways into the city. As they approached, they must have marveled at the sight before them: a city of gleaming temples, wide causeways, and canals alive with canoes. Whitewashed walls shone in the sunlight, gardens bloomed with colour, banners fluttered in the breeze. From afar, Tenochtitlan seemed to float upon water, a vision more dazzling than anything they had ever seen in Europe. Cortés himself is said to have stood in awe, whispering that no city in Spain, not even Seville or Córdoba, could rival its beauty. For the Mexica, this was confirmation of their greatness, and also of the danger. Moctezuma received the strangers in his palace, surrounded by nobles, priests, and warriors. He wore a cloak of turquoise and feathers, his sandals studded with jade. His presence commanded reverence, and yet he bowed to the strangers, offering garlands of flowers, gifts of gold, and words of welcome. To them he said, "You have come to your city. Welcome to Tenochtitlan." The Spaniards bowed in return, though in their hearts they saw opportunity, for they recognized both the power of the city and the divisions within its empire. Allies stood ready to turn against Mexica tribute. Wealth glittered in storerooms and temples. and the hesitation of the emperor left openings to be seized. Within days, tension grew. The Spaniards demanded more gold, more food, more tribute. They marveled at the temples, but also scorned them, calling them false. They watched the rituals with curiosity and fear. To the Mexica, these men were strange, disruptive, and dangerous. To the Spaniards, the Mexica were powerful, yet vulnerable, their world built upon faith that could be shaken. Still, for a time, the city held its breath. Moctezuma housed the strangers in his palace, entertained them with feasts, and offered them gifts. The markets continued, the Chinampas fed the people, the temples echoed with drums. Life carried on, yet beneath it all ran a current of unease, a sense that the balance was shifting, that the sacred order trembled. Can you imagine walking through the streets of Tenochtitlan in those days, seeing Spaniards in gleaming armor moving among the crowds, their horses stamping on causeways, their cannons booming in tests of fire, children staring in wonder, women whispering in fear, warriors gripping their spears tightly as they passed? The air itself must have felt heavy, filled with questions, filled with dread. At night, the city still glowed with torchlight, its canals reflecting stars. But above the calm waters, omens lingered. Priests whispered of dreams, of gods restless, of change inevitable. And in the palace, Moctezuma prayed, uncertain whether he was welcoming gods or destroyers. The strangers had come. The horizon of the Mexica world was no longer guarded only by mountains and the cycles of the sun. It had been breached by sails, steel, and ambition. The meeting of two worlds had begun, and neither would remain the same. The city of Tenochtitlan still glimmered upon the lake, its markets alive with voices, its temples crowned with banners. But beneath the rhythm of daily life, shadows lengthened. Strangers walked its streets now, armored men who carried thunder in their hands, and beasts that struck the earth with hooves. They dined in Moctezuma's palace, accepted his gifts, and yet their eyes lingered too long upon the treasures of gold, the wealth of feathers, the abundance of tribute. At first, the city held its breath, uncertain. The Mexica watched them with awe, suspicion, and unease. The Spaniards, in turn, marveled at the city's beauty even as they sought ways to control it. For Hernan Cortés was not a man content with admiration. He was driven by ambition. Soon the fragile peace broke. The Spaniards, fearing rebellion, seized Moctezuma within his own palace. Imagine the shock of the people, their emperor, the great speaker, held captive by foreigners. Priests whispered of blasphemy. Warriors gripped their spears. Women wept. And yet Moctezuma, cautious and pious, remained calm. From within captivity, he urged his people to remain at peace, to obey the strangers, perhaps still believing they carried divine destiny. But the patience of the city frayed. One day, during a festival in the sacred precinct, thousands gathered to dance in honor of their gods. The drums beat, the flutes sang, the air shimmered with the movement of dancers adorned in feathers and jewels. Suddenly the Spaniards, fearing the gathering was a prelude to rebellion, attacked. They fell upon unarmed celebrants with swords and spears, cutting down dancers in their finery, staining the plaza with blood. The festival turned to horror. The music ceased, cries rose, the sacred precinct became a place of chaos and grief. From that moment, the city erupted. The Mexica struck back, laying siege to the Spaniards within the palace. Stones and arrows rained upon them. Food was cut off, water withheld. The narrow streets and canals that had once welcomed the strangers became traps. For days the city shook with battle cries, with the pounding of drums, with the clash of obsidian against steel. In the midst of the turmoil, Moctezuma himself was brought to speak to his people, perhaps to calm them. Accounts differ, but all say the attempt failed. Some say the people no longer trusted him, believing he had submitted too fully to the strangers. Others say stones were thrown, and Moctezuma, wounded, soon died. Whether by his people's hands or the Spaniards, the emperor who had welcomed the strangers would not see the end of their struggle. His death left the city leaderless, its grief sharpened into fury. At last, under cover of night, the Spaniards tried to flee. Laden with stolen gold, they crept along the causeways, hoping to escape the city's wrath. But the Mexica were waiting. From canoes and rooftops they rained down arrows and spears. Warriors rushed to cut the causeways, plunging men and horses alike into the lake's dark waters. It was a night of chaos, of cries and thunder, remembered forever as La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. Many Spaniards fell, drowned by the weight of their stolen gold. Others were seized and later offered upon temple steps to the gods. Only a battered remnant, Cortés among them, managed to escape into the hills beyond. The Mexica rejoiced, believing they had cast out the intruders. Yet victory was not final, for Cortés was relentless. He regrouped, called upon his allies, and prepared to return stronger than before. And indeed, he returned with fury. Spanish steel alone might not have been enough, but with him marched thousands of indigenous allies, Tlaxcalans, Totonacs, and others who saw in the Spaniards a chance to free themselves from Mexica tribute. Together, this army of strangers and natives swept once more into the valley. Tenochtitlan braced itself for siege. Warriors stood upon causeways, priests prayed upon temple steps, farmers and families prepared to endure. The lake itself became battlefield, canoes darting across the waters, obsidian blades flashing in the sun. Yet the Spaniards now built brigantines, small warships armed with cannons, which they launched upon the lake. For the first time, Tenochtitlan's canals echoed with the crash of waves and the thunder of guns. Day after day the battle raged. Streets that once carried laughter and markets now filled with smoke and cries. Temples that once rang with songs of faith now shook with cannon fire. The air grew heavy with ash, the waters stained with struggle. The Chinampas, once blooming with maize and flowers, became fields of war. Hunger set in. The siege tightened, cutting off supplies of food and water. Families grew weak, children cried, elders prayed for relief. Yet the warriors of Tenochtitlan fought on, their courage unbroken, their city defended with every breath. Can you imagine standing on the temple steps during those days, looking out across the lake, seeing smoke rise from burning causeways, hearing the clash of steel and obsidian, smelling the acrid air of gunpowder mingled with incense? Around you, priests chant prayers, warriors shout defiance, families cling to hope. The city still gleams in sunlight, but its strength is fading. The Spaniards pressed ever inward. Street by street, canal by canal, the city fell. But every step was costly. Warriors leapt from rooftops, striking with spears. Canoes ambushed brigantines in narrow waters. Even as hunger gnawed and disease spread, the Mexica fought as though the sun itself depended upon their courage. Yet destiny had shifted. Fire and steel, disease and betrayal, ambition and fear. Together they brought the empire to its knees. The march of conquest was not a single battle, but a long unravelling. It was the crumbling of walls, the silencing of drums, the fading of songs. It was the grief of a people who had once believed themselves chosen, watching as their city of water and stone was torn apart. And still, even in the final days, they fought with pride. For to the Mexica, courage itself was an offering, one last gift to the gods who had sustained them. The city that had once risen from marsh and prophecy now stood in flames and ruin. Yet its story was not over. For though conquest brought collapse, memory endured, in songs, in stories, in the hearts of survivors. As the smoke drifted over the lake and the stars returned to the night sky, the march of conquest slowed, but the echoes of Tenochtitlan's courage would never fade. The lake lies heavy beneath the weight of smoke. Once clear waters shimmered with the colours of sunrise, but now they ripple with ash and sorrow. Canoes lie broken along the reeds, causeways crumble, and the air tastes of fire. Tenochtitlan, jewel of the valley, heart of an empire, endures its last dawn. The siege had dragged on for weeks. Hunger gnawed at every stomach. Where once the markets brimmed with maize, beans and chilies, now the people chewed bark, roots and scraps of leather. The Chinampas that once bloomed with maize now lay trampled and burned. Water grew scarce, for the aqueducts had been cut, and the canals themselves fouled by war. Disease too had come, smallpox, carried by strangers, spreading swiftly through homes and temples. Families fell silent, courtyards emptied, voices faded. No spear nor obsidian blade could strike against such an unseen foe. Still, the city fought on. Warriors lined rooftops and causeways, hurling stones and darts upon advancing enemies. Canoes darted across canals, ambushing brigantines with desperate courage. The drums still thundered, though their rhythm grew weaker, their echoes more hollow. Inside the palace, the Mexica chose a new leader after Moctezuma's fall. Cuauhtemoc, the young warrior prince, rose as Huey Tlatoani, the great speaker, though his reign would be brief and tragic. His name meant descending eagle, a symbol of courage in the darkest hour. Barely more than a youth, he carried the weight of a dying empire upon his shoulders. Cuauhtemoc led with defiance. He refused surrender, urged his warriors to fight on, and himself took the field, his obsidian blade gleaming, his voice rallying the weary. To his people, he became a beacon, a final hope. Yet even his courage could not halt the tide. The Spaniards pressed closer each day. Their brigantines ruled the lake, their cannons shattered walls, their steel cut through obsidian. And behind them marched thousands of native allies, long resentful of Mexica tribute, now eager for vengeance. The city was outnumbered, outgunned, and starved. Imagine walking through Tenochtitlan in those last days. Streets once swept clean were now choked with rubble. The white temples stood blackened with smoke. Gardens lay crushed, flowers withered, fountains dry. Families huddled in darkened rooms, children weak with hunger, elders whispering prayers. The once proud city, which had dazzled visitors with its beauty, had become a place of shadows, and yet pride endured. Even as their bodies weakened, the Mexica's spirit held fierce. Songs were sung in defiance, prayers lifted for strength, warriors painted their faces for battle. They would not yield easily. To die in defense of the city was to honor the gods, to stand alongside ancestors, to keep faith with the sun. Day by day, the Spaniards advanced, Streets became battlegrounds. Canals became rivers of struggle. The thunder of cannons echoed against mountains, and smoke rose in dark plumes, blotting out the sky. At last, the final assault came. The Spaniards and their allies swarmed the causeways, breached the city's heart, and pressed into the sacred precinct itself. The Templo Mayor, once a beacon of faith, became a battlefield. Warriors fought upon its steps, obsidian blades clashing against steel. Priests prayed within its shrines, incense mixing with smoke. Women and children fled, their cries piercing the chaos. Cuauhtémoc fought to the last. His men carried him across canals in a canoe as the city crumbled. But he was captured, seized by the Spaniards as he tried to flee the burning ruins. It is said he raised his head with dignity, refusing to bow. To Cortés he declared, "I have done all that I could in defense of my city and my people. Take my life now, with the dagger you hold in your hand." But Cortés did not kill him. Instead, he kept him alive, a captive emperor, the symbol of a fallen world. And so, Tenochtitlan, once the city of water and flowers, the city of markets and music, the city of temples and warriors, fell. The last dawn of its independence was filled not with song and laughter, but with smoke and silence. The canals that once reflected stars now mirrored fire. The temples that once touched the heavens now lay in ruin. The people who once believed themselves chosen now walked as captives beneath the gaze of strangers. Can you imagine the silence that followed? The drums stilled, the songs ended, the markets hushed. Only the lapping of water against stone, the crackle of fire, and the sobs of survivors remained. Yet even in ruin, memory endured. Survivors carried their songs, their stories, their traditions. The city's stones would be torn down, its temples broken, but its spirit lived on in the hearts of its people. For Tenochtitlan was more than stone and water. It was belief, courage, endurance. Though the city had fallen, the story of its rise, its brilliance, and its final dawn would never be forgotten. The sun set that evening upon ruins, but also upon memory. And memory is a flame that no conquest can extinguish. The smoke has settled. The cries of battle have faded. The once proud city of Tenochtitlan lies broken, its temples toppled, its streets flooded with rubble, its markets silent. Where songs once rose like blossoms into the air, only the whisper of wind remains. And yet, among these ruins, life still stirs. Survivors move through the wreckage, carrying water, searching for food, clinging to one another. The fall of the city was not the end of its people. For though stone can crumble and temples can burn, memory and spirit endure. The Mexica, stripped of empire, stripped of power, began the slow, painful work of survival. The Spaniards wasted no time in reshaping the city. Where the Templo Mayor once towered, they built churches. Where palaces and gardens had spread, they raised their own stone walls. The city of Tenochtitlan became the foundation for a new capital, Mexico City, the center of Spanish rule in the Americas. The old and the new blended uneasily, each layer of stone pressing upon the last. Yet beneath the surface, echoes of the Mexica world remained. Survivors still spoke their language, Nahuatl, soft and melodic, carrying stories from parent to child. They still cooked maize into tortillas, beans into stews, chilies into sauces. They still wove cloth, sang songs, told legends of gods and ancestors. Even as Spaniards demanded tribute and labor, even as disease thinned their numbers, the Mexica found ways to hold on to pieces of themselves. Cuauhtémoc, the last emperor, lived on for a time as a captive. Though his city had fallen, he carried himself with dignity, refusing to betray his people's memory. In the years after the conquest, he was taken on Spanish expeditions, a silent shadow of a fallen throne. Eventually, he was executed, accused of treachery. Yet to the Mexica, he remained a symbol of resistance, the eagle who descended but never bowed. For ordinary people, life after conquest was a slow reshaping. They laboured under new rulers, their tribute now paid not in feathers and cacao, but in gold and silver, crops and labour. They were pressed into building churches, roads and homes for their conquerors. Yet in their daily lives, in kitchens and marketplaces, in lullabies and prayers, their heritage endured. The Spaniards introduced new animals, horses, cattle, sheep, pigs and chickens. They brought wheat, barley, grapes and sugarcane. They introduced iron tools, wheel-driven carts and weapons of steel. But the Mexica gave as much as they received. They shared maize, beans, squash, chocolate, tomatoes, chilies, and vanilla. Foods that would soon reshape diets across the world. In this way, even in loss, their influence spread far beyond the Valley of Mexico. Every tortilla, every cup of chocolate, every bite of tomato carried whispers of Tenochtitlan's gardens. The temples of the old gods were torn down, yet faith transformed rather than vanished. The Spaniards brought Christianity, building churches atop sacred sites, baptizing survivors into a new faith. And yet, beneath the surface, old traditions lingered. Festivals once held for Huitzilopochtli or Tlaloc shifted into celebrations of saints. Offerings of flowers and candles continued, only now before new altars. The rhythms of the sacred calendar echoed faintly within the cycles of the church year. Can you imagine walking through the ruins in those years? To see children playing in the shadow of crumbled temples, their laughter rising where drums once beat. To hear women grinding maize on stone metotes, their hands repeating motions unchanged for centuries. To watch elders telling stories of the eagle and the cactus, of gods and warriors, their voices weaving memory into the future. The city may have fallen, but its people endured. And even within the Spanish world, the Mexica left their mark. Their language shaped place names. Their artistry decorated new buildings. Their labor raised the foundations of Mexico City. Their music blended with Spanish hymns. Their foods flavored European tables. Their symbols wove into a new, hybrid culture. This was not an easy survival. It was marked by hardship, by loss, by grief. Entire families were gone, taken by disease. Communities were broken, traditions altered, freedoms lost. Yet within this sorrow lay a quiet strength. For to survive at all was to resist disappearance. To speak Nahuatl, to plant maize, to sing a lullaby to a child. These acts became forms of defiance, ways of saying, "We are still here." Generations passed. Children grew up knowing no empire, only stories of one. They heard of Tenochtitlan, the city upon water, told with pride and sorrow. They learned of warriors and temples, of gardens and gods, of Moctezuma and Cuauhtémoc. And though they lived under Spanish rule, these stories reminded them of who they were, of the roots beneath the new city. In this way, the Mexica transformed. They became part of a new world, yet never entirely left the old behind. Their voices blended with Spanish, their traditions merged with Christianity, their foods crossed oceans, their symbols endured. The eagle on the cactus remained alive in memory, waiting for its place in the future. Can you picture a family in those years after conquest? A grandmother sits by a hearth, grinding maize, telling children of the eagle that marked their people's destiny. A father works in the fields, planting maize alongside wheat, blending old crops with new. A mother sings lullabies, her voice soft and steady, carrying both sorrow and hope. In their small acts, the Mexica lived on. And so, from the ruins of empire, from ashes and silence, came survival. Not the survival of armies or emperors, but the survival of ordinary lives, of kitchens and gardens, of songs and prayers, the survival of spirit. The city of Tenochtitlan had fallen, but the people of the valley endured. They carried their memory forward, hidden in language, in food, in faith, in love. And though centuries would pass, their echoes would never fade. For memory is stubborn and identity is resilient. Among the ruins, flowers still bloom. And where flowers bloom, life continues. The night sky spreads wide above the valley, the same sky that once shone upon Tenochtitlan's towers, the same stars that guided the Mexica in their long migration. Beneath those stars lies a modern city, vast and restless, built upon layers of stone and memory. Mexico City hums with traffic and light, yet if one listens closely, one can still hear echoes. Whispers of drums, the laughter of markets, the lapping of water against stone. The Aztecs are gone as an empire, yet their legacy lives everywhere. It lives in words, in food, in art, in symbols, in the very identity of a nation. It lives in memory beneath the stars. Language is one of their lasting gifts. Nahuatl, once the voice of emperors and poets, still flows from tongues today. Place names across Mexico preserve its sounds. Chapultepec, the hill of the grasshoppers. Popocatépetl, the smoking mountain. Tenochtitlan itself, remembered in syllables that mean the place of the prickly pear cactus. Everyday words too survive. Chocolate, tomato, coyote, all trace their roots to Nahuatl, carried now across the world. Food, too, is inheritance. Every tortilla pressed upon a hot griddle, every spoonful of beans, every chili sparking upon the tongue, carries echoes of the Mexica kitchen. Chocolate, once frothed with water and spiced with chili in golden cups, has become a comfort across continents. Tomatoes, maize, and vanilla transformed cuisines in Europe, Africa, and Asia. In this way, the gifts of the Aztecs feed the world still, as their Chinampas once fed Tenochtitlan. Symbols endure as well. The eagle upon the cactus, clutching the serpent, remains the emblem of Mexico, shining at the heart of its flag. It is the same vision that guided wanderers across deserts, the same promise that birthed a city upon water. To see it now is to see a bridge across centuries, a reminder that destiny, once whispered by gods, still beats within a nation's heart. Art and poetry, too, carry their voices, in codices painted with bright colours, in stone carvings of serpents and suns, in songs preserved through memory. The Mexica left fragments of themselves. Their poetry speaks softly across time, of flowers and death, of the fleeting nature of life, of the certainty that beauty and sorrow walk hand in hand. These words remind us that they were not only warriors and rulers, but also dreamers and singers, people who gazed upon flowers and stars and wondered, as we do, about the meaning of existence. Their calendar, though no longer followed in daily life, still fascinates. It reflects not only astronomy, but philosophy, the belief that time is cyclical, that ages rise and fall, that nothing is permanent, yet nothing is wholly lost. To remember, it is to remember their vision of a universe always in motion, always renewed. And most of all, their legacy endures in the resilience of their descendants. The Mexica as an empire fell, but their people did not vanish. Their blood flows in millions of Mexicans today, their traditions woven into daily life, their stories told in families, their spirit carried forward. Festivals still bloom with flowers, songs still echo with rhythms of ancient drums, prayers still blend old and new. The past lives quietly within the present. Can you imagine standing on the ruins of the Templo Mayor today? The stones lie in fragments, yet their outlines rise enough to suggest what once was. Around them towers the modern city, cars rushing, lights gleaming, buildings stretching skyward. And yet, in the hush of twilight, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the drums again. You can almost smell incense rising. You can almost see feathers glimmering in torchlight. The past is not gone. It sleeps beneath the stones, beneath the streets, beneath the stars. The Aztecs teach us that greatness is not only in conquest or power, but in resilience, in creativity, in the ability to turn marsh into garden, hunger into feast, hardship into song. They remind us that life is fragile, yet beauty can bloom even in the harshest places. They remind us that memory itself is power, that even when empires fall, stories endure. And so, as we close this journey, let us linger once more in imagination. Picture Tenochtitlan in its splendor, temples gleaming white in the sun, canals alive with canoes, markets bursting with color, music and laughter carrying on the breeze. Picture its gardens, its warriors, its priests, its families, all bound together by faith, by courage, by dreams. Then picture the stars above, shining silently as they did then, as they do now. The people of the eagle and the cactus are gone as rulers, yet they live on in spirit. Their story continues not only in books or ruins, but in every tortilla, every word of Nahuatl, every fluttering flower on a festival altar, every child who learns the tale of their ancestors. The Aztecs are not only history, they are memory, they are resilience, they are legacy. And as night deepens, as the air grows still, perhaps you feel them close, not as warriors, not as conquerors, but as voices in the wind, as echoes in the stones, as stars in the sky above. Rest now, knowing their story endures. Rest now, beneath the same stars that once guided them. Rest, with memory alive, with history at peace. Sleep well.